Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of The Numbers. I'm Eric Grenier, and I'm joined as always by Philippe J. Fournier. Philippe, we got a packed show today.
Oh, we absolutely do. Good morning, Eric, and hello, everybody. Glad to have you on board. We have horse race numbers, we have healthcare numbers, we have provincial polls. I mean, I think now this is the first podcast of the year right now, the early year, that we have that much stuff. So I think that the wheel has started to turn. Oh, and by the way, today, in 11 months, my friend, it's Christmas. So only 11 months to go.
It'll come faster than you think.
It's a text I love to send my mother every 25th of the month because she always stresses out about the family dinner that we didn't have this year because of COVID. But anyway.
Did she freeze everything so that you can use it next year?
She probably did, yeah. Well, next year. Well, I hope not, but we'll see. So how are you, Eric?
Oh, everything's good. It's a kind of an icy day here in Ottawa, so probably not going to go outside that much because I might slip and fall. But no, things are good. It does feel like the political season's starting to get going. We had the Liberals had their cabinet retreat. The NDP was out in Edmonton doing their thing. So why don't we dive right into some of these federal topics? And I guess we're going to start with the numbers as we usually do. And there was a poll from Angus Reid Institute that came out. The overall numbers showed no change from where things were in early December when they were last in the field. So they had 41% for the Conservatives, 24% for the Liberals, 20% for the NDP, 17-point lead for the Conservatives. So again, we're back to that, the mid-teens to mid to high teens, I guess, that we saw at the end of November, early December. There's also a Nanos poll that came out, and again, the rolling poll, but it showed that the gap was widening again. So it does seem to be clear that whatever might have happened over the holidays that might have got things closer to 10 points seems to be going away, and it's now closer to that 15-point gap that we saw before. What was your takeaway from this poll when it came out?
Well, again, we have to be careful, and I think most of our listeners and viewers know this, that you have to be careful to compare polls from different pollsters, right? I mean, you have to look at the trends from a single pollster at a time. And for the Angus Reid Institute, they didn't see any change, right? So they were on the field, I think it was late November. They released in early December. And they had the exact same numbers, 41-24. So no movement. And thing is, this lead, the longer it goes, now it's been, 6 months now? The longer it goes, I think there's an aura of inevitability that will start to grow, I think, on the Liberals. And, wouldn't you want to be a fly on the wall during the cabinet retreat for the Liberals? Just wonder, okay, what are they saying? Are they actually looking at each other and says, okay, there's something going on here? Or are they just, we've been done in the polls before, that's nothing. I truly wonder. And I know from speaking directly to MPs that when they say, oh, we don't look at polling, it's not important, we have a job to do, they're lying. They look at polls all the time. It has to have an effect on their morale, on their train of thought. So yeah, it's not good for the Liberals, and at some point it will feel irreversible. What do you think?
I do wonder how much of the cabinet and the caucus kind of breaks down in the different groups, right? There's probably almost certainly a group that thinks things are going really badly, we need to really do something, or we're going to lose. This is a moment to panic. And then there's probably another group that says, oh, there's still lots of time, things will turn around, we'll be okay, let's just keep going forward. And as you said, the longer that goes on, the more tension I think there would be between those two groups. And does the one group get bigger than the other by the end of it? We already saw one MP coming out expressing some discontent, and we'll get to that later. But it is going to be difficult the longer this goes on. And some of the regional numbers, and we don't want to go too far into the regionals, but they're just murder for the Liberals, right? There's a 17-point lead for the Conservatives in Ontario at 45%. They're ahead by 22 points in Atlantic Canada, over 50%. Big leads in Alberta and Saskatchewan as always, ahead in British Columbia. This is, again, we're getting to the point of the 200-seat majority that we had again before Christmas.
And not only that, I will add also the best province for the Liberals usually is still Quebec. And in that poll, you have the Bloc Québécois with 36% and with a 9-point lead over the Liberals. But then again, we have to, if we compare to the previous Angus Reid poll, the Liberals got better. They were at 23 in Quebec, and the Bloc had a 14-point lead. Now it's only a 9-point lead. So, but still, the trend is there. I mean, those numbers split 36% for the Bloc Québécois historically is not that high. It's good when you look at recent years.
Yeah, since 2019, it's good. Yeah,
exactly. But the thing is, because of the vote splits, I mean, the Liberals, would they win anything in Francophone Quebec? Maybe a seat or two, maybe Saint-Maurice, maybe some in the eastern townships and the Outaouais region. But the map for the federal Liberals would kind of look like with the provincial Liberals in Quebec.
Yeah.
You wouldn't see much red outside of the southern Quebec and Montreal region. And we saw also polling, in Toronto and Mississauga from Liaison Strategies. I think we talked about this earlier, but so the red wall in the Toronto and the GTA is starting to crack for the Liberals. So if they lose Toronto and they lose, Quebec except Montreal, there's not much left. And that would be a rout. So again, it's the Angus Reid Institute, and it's one poll, but thing is it 17 or is it 14? Does it really matter?
No.
Right? It doesn't, right? Unless we see a 10 or a 9 in the next few months, that is consistently across the polling firms in this country. But it's not happening. So the tightening of December, maybe it was just a little bump. And it's okay. I mean, we did say at the end, we didn't say, oh, momentum shift. No, we said, let's wait in January to see if it lasts. And it didn't. So
yeah, I think it's clear enough, at least from the number of polls that came out at the time, that something might have gotten a little bit better over that time. But it's clear now, I think, that it's gotten worse again for the Liberals, rather than what happened over the holidays maybe not being real. Now, the fact that it was the holidays, maybe that had a bit of an impact on the polling, but a lot of the attention on this poll came on the question of motivation. And I saw most of the articles that were written about this poll were talking about this. So the Angus Reid Institute asked Conservative voters if they were voting because they liked Poilievre and the Conservatives or because they wanted to block the Liberals. And they asked the same kind of question to the Liberals. Were they doing it because they liked Justin Trudeau and the Liberals or because they were trying to block the Conservatives? So you roughly had, among the Conservatives, a 2-to-1 split that it was because of the Conservatives, not because they were blocking the Liberals. And then for the Liberals, you had a 2-to-1 split, more or less, that it was they were blocking the Conservatives rather than the Liberals. I didn't think that was that... Like, I wasn't that shocked about it. A lot of people vote for a particular party to block the other party. Yeah. But I don't know. What did you make of it? Did you think that was significant?
The thing is, if the Liberals are polling at 35, like they used to not that long ago, and you have 12 to 15% among those that say, well, we really don't want the Conservatives. We want to keep the Liberal fortress intact. That's okay. It's just that 15% of Liberals is a much bigger number now when compared to the 24 overall. So in that poll, among decided voters, only 9% support the Liberals, they say, because of their policies, not because they want to block Conservatives. That is a low, low number. But there was also the number with the NDP, right? The NDP is at 20% in this poll among decided voters, which is in the same range we're used to, maybe a tad high. I still have the NDP in the high teens, not at 20%, but 7%, 7 point. So about basically a third of NDP voters said they would switch if they feel the Conservatives could win in the riding. This has the potential of squeezing the NDP for all they're got and have a very, very polarized election. If the Liberals slip, we talked about this before, Eric, if the Liberals slipped at the same level or below the NDP, the reverse will happen, of course. But if the Liberals still hold on to those mid-20s and, you're in the riding and you see the projections that says 40% Conservative, 38% Liberal, and 15% NDP, the NDP has no chance of winning, and you say you have to wonder, do I really want to support my candidate even though he's going to lose or she's going to lose? Or do I want to try to just bump up the Liberals to block the Conservative? This has the potential of being really bad for the NDP, given also that it's not that their leader has been performing very highly in recent months. So potentially a very strong two-way race with the NDP being squeezed out if with those numbers.
It's the usual playbook for the Liberals, right? By the end of
yeah.
the campaign, telling people they have to vote for the Liberals to block the Conservatives. And there is the potential that that could work very well, especially when you have a leader like Pierre Poilievre, who is polarizing and disliked among people on the center left, right? If it's a leader that seems less threatening, then there might not be as much of a drive to kind of get behind one party. But the Angus Street Institute did, they also asked us of Bloc voters and Green voters, and when they added them all together, the ones who said they could switch, it bumped the Liberals up to 34%, so they were only 7 points behind the Conservatives. Because of how the regionals broke down, they would probably still give the Conservatives a majority, but if we start to get into the single-digit range of a gap, then that majority, I think, becomes a bit more in question. So the playbook for the Liberals seems clear enough, but for the Conservatives, if they're over 40%, they're in obviously a pretty strong position. Historically, 40% usually gets you a majority, but things can change over time depending on how the vote efficiency works. But the
thing is also in the same
some
poll,
interesting results here.
Yeah, the favorability of the leaders was something that caught my eye. I mean, Trudeau has terrible numbers, like across the board. 64% disapproval, 32% approval, minus 32 net approval. That's terrible. Although it did get a little better from the previous Angus Street poll, but it's still terrible. You look at Poilievre. Poilievre is, 40% favorable, 50% unfavorable, so he's still in the negative. And Angus Street Institute, they broke down by gender and by age, which I thought was really interesting. So among male voters, Poilievre has a plus 10 in a young, plus 10 in the 35 to 54-year-old, 54-year-old, and plus 11 with older voters, right? Older male voters. And he's really down in the dumps with women. Minus 36 with young women, minus 19 with women between 35 and 54, and minus 30 with older women. But the thing is, Trudeau is disliked by everybody. Here's the thing. So this is what is so interesting to me, because I look at these numbers. Poilievre is really liked by the Conservative base. He's not really liked by anybody else. But Trudeau is disliked by a lot of people. Again, this aura of inevitability that will the closer we get to the election, as we creep into 2024 and slowly 2025, I mean, the Liberals are heading into a wall right now. And we wonder about that in the summer and in the fall and in the winter, and now we're in 2024 and those numbers are not getting better. I know I sound like a broken record, but this is not sustainable. I mean, at some point, if the caucus, if cabinet doesn't raise the red flags, like, we are going to lose and lose badly. Because right now I see the best case scenario for the Liberals is to have an honorable loss. Like, to lose, but not to be completely destroyed. Those numbers suggest that the Liberals would be destroyed. It would be 1984 or 2011 again. So
they are at the point right now where it seems like they are just waiting for the Conservatives to make a mistake, right? Rather than doing something on their own to try to turn things around. They've obviously brought in some new kind of policies and messaging and all that kind of stuff, but I have some doubts that it's going to work in the long run.
So Eric, Léger had a very interesting poll about healthcare in this country. And, I mean, they did not reinvent the wheel. The questions were pretty straightforward. I mean, one of the ones that caught my eye was, okay, overall, how would you rate the healthcare system in your province? Of course, when you look at the overall numbers, that doesn't tell you much. 28% say either good or excellent, 35% said fair, and 37% said poor or very poor. But when you broke it down by regions, obviously we don't have individual Atlantic provinces. Atlantic provinces were the worst. So only 9% of respondents in Atlantic provinces say it was good or excellent. Well, actually, 0% said excellent. 66% said total poor. So is this a sample size issue? Because there was only 100 respondents. But thing is, with 100 respondents, you get plus or minus 11%. You don't get plus or minus 25%. So that was really bad. But what really caught my eye, because there was a good sample, it was Quebec. 15% of Quebec respondents said either good or excellent. And this was 400, I think, cases in Quebec. No, margin of error plus or minus 5, around the 50% mark. 51% of Quebec respondents said it was poor or very poor. And we wonder why François Legault fell from grace throughout 2023. This is partly it. I mean, we were told by the the health minister during the holidays, if, you can stay home even if you're sick, don't go to the emergency rooms. Like, okay, what am I paying taxes for? So there was a lot of anger, not necessarily from me. Thankfully, I'm healthy and I hope I stay healthy. But I think François Legault is really hurting from many crises, and one of them is the healthcare system. They just voted in their new reform, la réforme Dubé. We'll see if it changes anything. But really, really a black eye right now for the CAQ in Quebec. What did you make of? What did you see in that poll that made you react? That caught your eye?
Well, the 15% you mentioned for Quebec, to put it in context, it's twice as high, the people who think that the healthcare system is good. In Ontario, it's 31. It's nearly twice as high in Alberta, in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And in Alberta and BC, which I'm actually kind of shocked to see the numbers as high as this, the 46% in Alberta think it's good, 40% in BC. So when you put it in those contexts, you see how much further back Quebec is. And it does kind of, as you said, explain what's going on with François Legault. But also, when you're looking at the Atlantic numbers, it's nothing new that Atlantic Canadians think the healthcare system in their region is troubled. Obviously, they have issue with just resources, with getting doctors to go there. There's lots of stories about how there's not enough family doctors. Tim Houston in 2021 won an upset victory in the Nova Scotia election based entirely on healthcare. It does make you wonder, how much trouble does this put someone like Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick, Andrew Furey next year in Newfoundland and Labrador having elections? Healthcare is a perennial kind of issue. But if another party can really grasp it, as Houston did in Nova Scotia, as Wab Kinew and the New Democrats did in Manitoba, that can be pretty rough for an incumbent government. But I'm not hearing you can tell me I'm wrong, but I'm not really hearing the Parti Québécois or the other opposition parties really grabbing this issue as much as maybe we've seen with the new, like I said, the New Democrats in Manitoba, PCs in Nova Scotia. It doesn't feel like they're trying to use the healthcare system as their springboard back into power.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, with the pandemic, of course, I think all parties opposition parties were really careful not to look like they're criticizing the big plan of the government. You had to have some solidarity, right? But we're out of this now. And the CAQ, just before Christmas, as we said, they voted in La Réforme Dubé. They did it under Le Baillon, right? I'm not sure how you say that in English, but basically they cut short
in the House.
They cut short opposition time and questions just to push it through, and it was one of the biggest bill voted in Quebec history, like 1,000 articles, right? And it creates a new agency, Santé Québec, that will be. I know it's a bad analogy, but it's like the Hydro-Québec of health, where there will be a guy who will be the CEO, that will not be an elected person, that will take care of this. It's just that this is bureaucracy, and good luck selling more bureaucracy to anybody, not just Quebec. Anybody in this country says, "Oh, we're going to fix this." How? Well, we have this new bureaucratic structure. So if it works, or if it increases the services in Quebec even just a little bit, it will be seen as a win. But we expect Quebec numbers very soon. I don't want to say spoilers, but we expect new Quebec numbers very soon. And looking at these numbers on healthcare, knowing that healthcare is always high on the issues of voters, this spells trouble for the CAQ and François Legault. And as you said, in Alberta, not that I know the health services in Alberta very well, but I was surprised to see 46% say it's good or great, and only 26 or 25% said it was poor. Good for them. Again, it's the perception. It's not that the system is better, but certainly it's perceived better by Albertans than Quebecers are perceiving their own health system.
Yeah. We had some other issues we wanted to talk about this week. I'd mentioned the MP out in Newfoundland and Labrador who criticized Justin Trudeau, talking about whether there should be a leadership review. And I don't think the Liberals, I'm not sure if the Liberals have that kind of mechanism in their party, especially when you're the incumbent government. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I asked around because I don't want to cut you off here, but I did share that with some journalists in Ottawa saying, okay, what would Trudeau get in a leadership review right now? And I was really cut short saying there's no mechanism. It's until the election, there's no mechanism. So it's not going to happen unless Mr. McDonald's, it was Ken McDonald, right? In Avalon. Unless Mr. McDonald's voice, it's duplicated by many others. I mean, the Liberals would be forced to do something, but there's no mechanism.
Yeah, that seems to be the sticking point. And, the Liberals also have right now free memberships, right? So if they decided to have a leadership review kind of thing among the membership, how would that work? Would there be a cutoff of right now so that you don't have a big flood of just randos getting in the party and voting him out? It just doesn't. As soon as I heard it, part of me was like, that doesn't seem like the culture that there's a leadership review, because that happens in the Conservatives, it happens with the New Democrats, but when I'm thinking about leadership reviews of Liberal leaders, none come to mind. Now someone might correct me that there's been some in the past, but whenever I've looked at what a leadership review score was for different party leaders, it always brings up New Democrats, it always brings up Conservatives, the PQ, parties like that, but I couldn't tell you when the last one is, and someone listening might know, but I can't remember what the last one is, and I've never really heard of a leadership review within the federal Liberal Party. Not to say that there hasn't been one, but it just doesn't seem to be part of their culture.
I think many parties have this policy that if you lose an election, to stay on leader, you have to have a leadership review. Thing is, usually when the Liberal leader loses, he's out. They don't keep those around, right?
The last one who didn't do that was Paul Martin, right? No, actually, no. He got out in 2006. Right? So what am I thinking? I was thinking of the 2004 as a defeat. No, the last Liberal leader who lost an election and stuck around, I think, was John Turner.
And he stuck. It's true. He did stick around. I mean, he must have. I mean, he stuck around for a long time. He was still leader in '88. So he must
lost
have
two
had,
elections. Yeah.
Yeah. So between '84 and '88, you would think that there would have been. I mean, we should know this, but. You would think there'd be a leadership review. Okay, we'll look this up and come back on this. But but what do you make of an MP of obviously not part of cabinet, but an MP openly saying? And by the way, shout out to Laurence Martin of Radio-Canada who broke the story. She did say on Radio-Canada Radio in Montreal how she was interviewing him because she was in Newfoundland, just a tour of Atlantic Canada. And he started talking about this, and he was like, "Oh, do you know we're on the record here?" And he was like, "No, it's okay." I mean, I imagine her face saying, "Oh, okay, so I can write this. That's interesting." But
it wasn't like someone got in touch or that we hear he's going to say something. It was like, let's talk to this guy, and he said this thing. Just hey, maybe we should do a leadership review. So that's like found money. That's it. Yeah. But. So he has a bit of a recent kind of background because he wasn't in support of the carbon tax. He voted with the Conservatives on an issue on that, or at least he was pressured to. I can't recall exactly how that played out. There was an article in the Hill Times where he was openly talking about crossing the floor to the Conservatives, but that he wasn't going to do it, which is just kind of bizarre. So it makes me feel that this guy is a little bit of a talker, right? Who will just kind of say things and maybe not reflecting on what the impact's going to be. But when you're an Atlantic Canadian MP, I think you do need to have a little bit of that latitude. Atlantic Canada is one of the few places in the country where the local MP matters quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And we've seen cases. Wayne Long was one in St. John, in New Brunswick, who also was kind of openly sometimes critical of the government, and he was reelected in the last election, and it wasn't a given that that would take place, right? So I could imagine that the Liberals would be willing to give MacDonald a little bit more of a loose leash than if he was an MP in Mississauga or Markham or something, where it doesn't really matter that much who the candidate is. But the question is if he's the only one who's going to do it, and he's really only saying maybe we should have a leadership review and see what the members think, and if they decide to keep him around, good, we'll go forward with that. But if we do see some others, then as you were talking earlier, the sustainability of these kinds of polling numbers and Trudeau's leadership starts to become a bit tenuous.
Hey, you want to talk about provinces? We had a fun poll with Léger in Alberta.
Alberta.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's no election coming soon, obviously, but still, I mean, the tracking is important. Much was made about this poll that was published in Post Media. So 50% for the United Conservative Party, Danielle Smith, which is roughly what she had in the election. I think it was 52%.
Yeah. And
43% for the New Democrats. Again, the same result as their election result. It was 44.1, I believe. So status quo, and this was fielded just before Rachel Notley's resignation. So it gives you like a marker in time to see, okay, where does the NDP go from here under like a new leadership race and then new leadership. The regionals were a bit strange, but that's okay. That's part of the game. It shows a big lead for the United Conservatives in Calgary, which would just wipe out basically all the progress the NDP done in Alberta's largest city. So what did you make of this? This is not a honeymoon for Danielle Smith, but this is sustained support. Basically, many Albertan, well, half of Albertan at least, Alberta voters, they like what they see out of Danielle Smith.
There's no regret, at least just yet, right? She's now been premier for, I think, 14 months?
Yep. That's right. It was October or November? Yeah.
So now, she's been there for a little while, and we're not seeing that Albertans are regretting that decision, but we're also not seeing that the NDP is falling away as Rachel Notley moves on. As you mentioned, the poll was done before she announced that she was resigning, but everybody kind of already knew she was, so I imagine that a lot of the respondents were kind of assuming that Notley was not going to be leader of the party. For the regionals, I do find in some of these polls, especially the ones that are done online, that the NDP usually does a bit better in the quote unquote regions than is actually the case. So I wouldn't be surprised if the 50-43 number is completely accurate, but the NDP is doing a little bit worse in the rural areas and a little bit better in Calgary than the poll says. But it's going to be really interesting to see once the NDP leadership race starts to unfold, because it's starting to happen. People are putting their pieces into place. It's going to be a lot about how do we win those extra seats in Calgary, right? Because that's what they needed to win the election. And curious to see if we'll see more polls during the year that have the NDP struggling a little bit in Calgary, because then it might put a little bit more urgency into the leadership race about how does the party appeal to Calgary and just get over the hump that they weren't able to do in the last election.
Little message to the NDP in Alberta: do not do like the Quebec Liberals. Don't wait 2.5 years, because one, that's ridiculous. It's too long, and two, Danielle Smith could very well stumble in the next year or two. And when she does, you want to have a leader in place to show off, to try to tour the province. What the Quebec Liberals aren't doing right now. François Legault is struggling, and the Liberals are nowhere to be seen because they have no leader whatsoever. They have rumors of leaders, but we won't get into that right now because it's too laughable. But so a little
it does seem like
the
NDP is going to go sooner. I don't think they're going to push it off. I would be surprised if they don't have a leader in place by the end of the year. So because we've already seen some, Kathleen Ganley came out with like an introductory video that wasn't an introductory video. So, you know, I feel like they're already starting to...
Try balloons? Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't have a trial balloon flying for 2 years, right? So presumably we'll see if they have a new leader in place by the end of the year. And as you said, I think that's... I don't think it's a good idea to wait on the leadership race. Get your person in and get them time to get their get comfortable in the job. Because a new leader comes in a few months before an election might be good for a honeymoon bump.
Yeah.
But I think it probably puts you in a worse place once you get to the actual election when the person's only been there for 6 months.
But we don't have any other provincial polls to talk about this week. But again, the National Assembly in Quebec is starting their new sitting. I think it's on Tuesday. Expect new Quebec numbers early next week, and of course, on next episode, we'll get into that because I think they will be very interesting.
Okay, and we did want to mark there was the passing of an MHA in Newfoundland and Labrador, Derek Bragg, who was a Liberal. He was elected in 2015. He served in cabinet. And he was diagnosed with cancer not very long ago, about 7 months, and he's passed away, and he wasn't that old, so that's very sad.
59 years old, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so condolences to him and his family and friends, and to the Newfoundland Labrador Liberals who lose a member of their family. So yeah, just wanted to mark that. Okay, let's do the questions of the week. So how this works, we mention it on every episode, public episode, that we ask questions for members of our Patreon, on the Patreon, on our Discord, and you can join it at thenumberspod.ca for as little as a little bit less than $5 a month now if you sign up for the entire year. So you can get your questions answered. You get the exclusive episodes that come out every 2 weeks. Philippe just mentioned an episode next week. That's for Patreon members only. So we got a few questions. There's a few I wanted to do.
Right.
We got one from Ali Gersoy on Discord. And he said, there were news stories about the federal government going, quote, back to its roots with a focus on the middle class. And he asked, do we have any data regarding the voting intentions or vote shifts across different socioeconomic classes? I pulled some numbers. I don't know if you want to look at them first or you want to go through them.
Well, I see them now. It's just, again, the thing is the middle class. I think when the Liberals got into power, we realized that the middle class encompasses a lot of people, right? What is,
especially when you're talking about if people feel like they're in the middle class.
Exactly. I mean, everybody, if you're not a millionaire or if you're not dirt poor, you may think you're middle class, and then you look at the numbers from StatCan, you realize, oh, okay, well, if you make, I don't know, $80,000 a year in my province or in Ontario, you're above the middle class. The median salary, household income in Quebec, I think it was $55,000. So if you're a couple making each $55,000, well, you're double the median. So it depends how you see it, and also it's based on income, right? You could have an income of $75,000 a year, but if you're sitting on an inheritance or you have assets, it's really hard to have a clear-cut view of what the middle class is. But yeah, why don't you go ahead? So you pulled Angus Street numbers, right?
Yeah, well, they were the most recent ones, and just like what you said, if you make $75,000 and you live in Toronto, that's not the same as if you make $75,000 and you live in Newfoundland and Labrador, right? Nope. So it makes a difference in terms of that. And like, the Liberals, I think, didn't ever mean it as a defined middle class, because they always said the middle class and those working hard to join it. So it was meant to be as encompassing as possible to include as many people. But anyway. So the Angus Street Institute was the most recent poll, so I pulled the numbers, and they do break it down by income brackets. So they have people who make less, or households that make less than $50,000, households that make between $50,000 and $100,000, and then households who make more than $100,000. When you pull the numbers, you see that the Conservatives don't do as well among the lowest income bracket they have here, but they were still leading in the polls. They had 31%. The NDP was second with 24%. The Liberals were 22%. Among those who made between $50,000 and $100,000, the Conservatives had 42%, Liberals 24%, NDP 18%, so kind of the same as the national portrait. And then the people who make over 100,000 households, the Conservatives at 47%, Liberals 23, NDP 19. When you compare that to the last Angus Reid Institute poll from before the 2021 campaign, the difference is kind of uniform. Conservatives are up 8 to 9 points among each of these groups. The Liberals are down, usually about 10 to 8 points among each of these groups. So it doesn't seem like there is a specific group that is being appealed to. That whether you're on the lower end of earnings, you're on the higher end, roughly the same amount of people have gone over to the Conservatives and roughly the same amount of people have left the Liberals. So I think that's kind of interesting.
It is. But I go back to the question, the federal government going back to its roots. I know it sounds good. I don't know what that means. What, they're going to promise electoral reform and legalize weed? They have already done that. So I don't know what that means. And again, those numbers indicate that the movement in voting intentions has no relations to your income. It was pretty uniform across the board. Very interesting numbers. Good question, Ali.
Yeah, I guess it's back to its roots in terms of its messaging.
Well, they want to go.
That seems to. It seems to imply that they forgot about the middle class over the last couple of years, but
well,
I don't know.
Yeah. Back to the roots when we were winning, basically.
Yeah. Back to our winning roots rather than our losing roots. Okay, we got a question from Sammy on the Discord. This was something that took place this week, so I wanted to highlight it. He said, "What do you think are the odds that Taylor Bacharach holds on to Skeena-Buckley Valley in the 2025 federal election?" So the news there, this is a riding in northern British Columbia. And just this past week, it was announced that Ellis Ross is going to be the Conservative candidate for Pierre Poilievre. He is the BC United MLA for Skeena. He's pretty well known in the area. He's Indigenous. He finished second in the the BC Liberal leadership race in 2022. So it seems like it's a bit of a get. But I'm curious, before he was even announced, did the NDP have a good shot of holding on to this riding?
Well, they only won it by 6 points. And of course, you know, and I know that when we look at the federal numbers, the BC breakdown, the BC subsample always varied so much from one to another. So it's hard, but to think that the NDP could lose 3-4 points and the Conservatives with a known local candidate, especially in those northern ridings, could pick up 3-4 points. I would put this in the conservative likely or maybe conservative leaning right now because the numbers in BC are so good for the Conservatives when you look at poll after poll after poll. And we were not sure really for the NDP. The NDP, I believe, had something like 29% of the vote in British Columbia, and polls have them as low as the low 20s or sometimes mid 30s. So we do not know. But a good local candidate like that, somebody who's known, who has experience, who knows how to run a campaign, could the Conservatives get 5 points out of that? I think they could. So this is a good pickup for the federal Conservatives.
Yeah, there's 3 little points I wanted to make. One is that from other polling we've seen, despite the fact the NDP is more or less holding its vote nationally and in most of the provinces, there does seem to be a bit of a transference that they are gaining some Liberals and losing some votes to the Conservatives. So in a riding like Skeena-Buckley Valley, that could hurt them a lot. Secondly, Ellis Ross, I think, is a good candidate for them. He's not a nationally known person or something like that, but I looked at the results for the BC Liberals in northern BC in the last election. He was pretty much one of the only ones who didn't lose support. So it shows that he kind of mattered a little bit. And lastly, when I was pulling the numbers from 2021 in Skeena-Buckley Valley, the PPC got 8% of the vote here. They were third.
Oh, yeah.
You got to think that 4 or 5 points of that 8 is going to go to the Conservatives just because of, the new direction from Pierre Poilievre. And right there, that more or less puts this in a toss-up. And so I'd have to agree with you that I think the Conservatives would now be the favorite in this riding.
Wow.
Here, why don't you do the next one?
Okay, Ron Fisher. Oh, an American question. I wonder if Nikki Haley goes the distance and Trump wins. What happens if Trump is jailed or has a heart attack before the election? Would she be the logical alternative at the last minute? Well, I mean, it all, I don't want to be cynical here, but it all depends on her backers. I mean, will she have the financing to go on all the way? She did say that New Hampshire was first, but it was not the last for her, so she's going to stick around. Trump has legal trouble. Trump doesn't seem very coherent right now. I mean, for some would say he never was coherent, but no, you haven't listened to his latest diatribes talking to his supporters. It's a word salad, basically. And we're starting to think maybe cognitively, maybe he's getting up there. Will he last all the way? I mean, she has no reason to quit. Unless her backers, her financial backers, say, okay, that's enough. But I do not follow the primaries as much as as other people, so I'm not sure I can answer that question. But why would you quit? Just go the distance and try to get as more votes. Get your profile high up to run for 2028, basically. If Trump is inevitable, which I don't think he is.
So the next state is South Carolina,
right.
which is her state. So we'll see if she gets some good numbers out of that. But I looked at sort of the rules of how this would work, right? So in Ron's question is sort of an assumption that Trump has won the nomination, or at least he won enough of the delegates to win the nomination, but he doesn't make it to the convention. So what happens in that case? Let's say that he, as I mentioned, who knows what it is? He can't run because legal issues. He's had a health issue or something like that. And he's no longer a candidate. So what happens is that the delegates who would be sent to the national convention then get kind of freed up. And then it becomes like an old-fashioned kind of delegated convention where you would nominate candidates on the floor. So it's not a given that if Nikki Haley has the second most delegates, that she would then become the front runner to replace Donald Trump in this kind of scenario. Because you could have all the Trump delegates decide to get behind, I don't know, someone else. They could get behind Ron DeSantis or Ramaswamy or something like that. So you could have a case where you have this convention that is between the Trump supporters and the not Trump supporters, and it doesn't necessarily mean that Haley would become the shoe-in to win. So it's an interesting scenario, but and I agree with you that I don't know why she would. Bernie Sanders stayed in the 2016 one until pretty much the end.
Yep,
and
absolutely. The
convention became kind of a thing. So I don't know why she wouldn't do that as well. But yeah, it's the context will depend on what happens at the convention if Trump can't make it to there.
Hear me out, Eric. Tucker Carlson. Well, if those Trump delegates can't vote for Trump, why not, right? He had steak last night. Was it in Edmonton or Calgary? I forgot. But
yeah.
But
people were saying that he's a potential vice presidential running mate for Donald Trump.
God. Okay.
Let's move on.
Let's move on. So NLC Milk asked, what is next? Oh, I like this question. What is next for Rachel Notley? I have thoughts, but they're not fun. So why don't you go first? What do you think is next for Rachel Notley?
I think what is next is not politics. I think she gets appointed to something, and that's it. Anything that else aside from becoming a leader of a national party would be a demotion for a former premier.
Yeah.
So I can't see her running as a candidate for anybody. I don't think that Jagmeet Singh is stepping aside. I'm not sure if she would really be interested in running for the federal leadership if it became available. The question here is whether she could replace Trudeau. I just don't see that kind of thing happening either.
No.
She would have to work on her French quite a bit.
Well, that's,
for me,
that would be down the list of things why she won't. But sure. I mean, it's So what is next is vacation, time with her family, sitting on a board for a few hundred Ks per year and giving conferences. There are some people out there that have politics in their blood and they just can't get enough. They need they need.
She literally does. Her father was also a leader of the party.
Yeah, well, yeah, that I meant it figuratively, but sure, no, you're correct. Some people, they need that dopamine shot, and of course I referred to the Nicodère earlier, but I don't want to compare her to the Nicodère. But she could just say, you know what, I was leader for 10 years, 10 years, 12 years, anyway, and a premier for 4. That could be enough. There is such a thing in politics as overstaying your welcome, and she's leaving at a good time. So what's next? Probably nothing. Probably just maybe professor in one of the universities in Alberta and just giving conferences, like doing a Mulcair, sometimes appearing in the media, like doing like Tom Mulcair, basically. So it's boring, but that's probably.
I haven't seen her I can't see her as a pundit. Well, for some reason, Mulcair seemed like a more likely candidate to be a pundit than her. I don't know.
But also, I mean, it's true that but the thing is, he doesn't do much punditing. What he does, it's out in the national media. But he works at Université de Montréal now, so I see that out of Rachel Notley, but I could be wrong. It's just I mean, if she took over the federal NDP, the federal NDP would change drastically. And we know from, again, the Mulcair years that the grassroots of the NDP, they're not fond too much about that unless you can really win. And I just don't see it happening. So.
All right, we were going to do a quiz, but we've been having some internet issues, so we're going to save it for next week or the week after. We'll figure that out. Why don't we just go straight to the number of the week? Philippe, what do you have for your number of the week?
I have 70%, Eric. 70% of Canadians are worried that the current healthcare system where they live in their provinces will not be able to get good quality medical attention to you if you get sick. This is a very high number. And I know healthcare in this country is a perennial subject and everybody whines about it, but this level of anxiety is kind of strange, and also it's I think a call to action for provincial governments because whatever they're doing in healthcare is not working, and so 70% is my number of the week.
Yeah, it's a live issue. It's not going to go away.
Oh yeah.
So mine is 2. My number of the week is 2. There are 2 vacancies in the House of Commons right now. There's going to be a by-election for at least one of them, and it'll be called in the next few days. The limit for the Durham by-election to be called is January 30th, so we're only a few days away from that. There's also a by-election coming in Toronto St. Paul's. It's a vacancy now, and the government can call the election starting January 27th. So between January 27th and January 30th, there's a chance that we could get 2 by-election calls, but we'll certainly get at least 1. So that's my number to watch, because it's something to watch over the next few weeks, because we will have a by-election campaign, at least 1, maybe 2.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I think we know who the winners will be, but the numbers will be interesting to see the trends line, right? So, yeah, absolutely. Good call.
Okay, so that'll be it for this episode. As always, if you would like to support this podcast, you'd like to get exclusive access to episodes every second week, early access to episodes every week comes out on Thursdays for our Patreon members. You can join it at thenumberspod.ca. If you're already a member, thanks very much for your support. Really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to this year. Philippe, hopefully your internet gets a little bit better, and by the time we chat next week. And regardless of that, I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you in 7 days.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon, Eric. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciate that.